now you had a little bit of idea about these methods. We're going to start putting some code into these assistants, but to kind of save time, I've created a few, excuse me, reload this. I've created a few samples of the applications that I want to use here. So what I've done is gone ahead and done the coding that we're going to do for a couple of these examples here, so you can see them. I'll have to spend time kind of typing it out or copying and pasting. So we were looking at the story view assistant. So now you'll see that we fleshed this out. My creator function doesn't really have anything in it at this stage. I'm not doing anything for initialization, but I am doing something during setup. And what I'm doing here is I'm actually retrieving, if you remember the view that we described a little bit earlier, there's a title area at the top and then a content area below that. So I'm retrieving the elements associated with the title and then the content, and then I'm assigning some predefined text into each of those elements. So this should be pretty straightforward if you're familiar with JavaScript and Internet HTML, just simply assigning those into those elements. This is less familiar to you. What I'm doing here is I'm actually doing the equivalent of getElement by ID, a JavaScript function, but I'm using a controller method to do that. Because webOS applications can live within multiple stages, and it's a little bit different. They have a little bit bigger scope than your standard web page. The framework manages elements across all those environments for you. So if you use the framework methods, you are guaranteed really to get the element you're targeting. If you use the getElement by ID and some of the other sort of similar methods, there may be times when you're not getting the element that you intend. So get is one of the controller methods that you're going to use a fair amount of. So we found the two element IDs and we've assigned this text to them. You can see I don't have anything in my other methods, activate, deactivate, clean up at this point. And this defines the contents of my scene from the code standpoint. Before that scene can be used, I have to push it onto the view. Something has to actually invoke it, and that something is going to be the stage assistant. So the stage assistant is going to use a stage controller function, which is called pushScene, and it's going to name the scene, and that's how it pushes that story view scene onto the view. I've done a few other things here. Stage assistants are similar to the scene assistants, have some special methods. Setup is one of them, and there are more advanced methods you'll learn about later that you can use within your stage assistant. But the initialization logic again goes here in your creator function, and your setup logic goes in the setup method here. I've done a couple other things here which are really not relevant to the example. I've created a global namespace for this app and assigned a version string. And we're going to have at least one other global in this demonstration, so that's why I'm showing you this. But you don't really need to do this to follow the example. Okay, so we've got our code in place, but we haven't got anything that defines where that code is going to go. And that we're going to do that within this HTML template. So now I shift over to the views directory, and I create the HTML, and I'm looking at my HTML template. And this is really empty. By when Palm Generate creates the scene, this template will be empty. I filled it up with this HTML code here. So again, if you remember the layout of the scene, there's the top part for the title, and that's what this set of divs does. It really defines the style and layout of that top part, and this bottom set defines the style and layout for the bottom part, which is the content. The essential part is this div here, which has the story view title element ID, which you remember from in the JavaScript code was the element that we went and retrieved and then assigned our text content to, and then the element summary is below here. Now you see all these other divs that wrap around it, and this can be kind of a confusing part of webOS development because there's a fair amount of styling that's associated with these various standard views that we're showing. And what we're doing here is we're actually wrapping our title with a couple of divs that use some of these standard or base styles, as we refer to them, in the framework. This Palm page header style in a multi-line style defines the basic style of the title area, which we are putting here, and then the text wrapper style defines the format for the summary area here. So let me go ahead and run this so you can see it. But I'm gonna talk a bit before we go on to the next example. I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about styling and how you can learn more about these styles and how you can learn how to use them. But first, let's go back into our terminal and our emulator, and let's create a package using this new application which I just showed you, and then we'll install it here. And now when I run this, you should see this is our initial scene where we have the title and the body here. But what about all those styles? So let's look for a minute here and talk for a minute here about these base styles. The framework defines in its CSS styles for very common HTML elements like paragraph, body, and so on, things that are very commonly used in HTML. It also defines styles for many of the scenes that you see in the applications, and it even defines styles for the widgets. These styles can be used. You can use these styles in any HTML template. We were using them there in a scene template. You can also use them in widget templates, like some widgets like lists use templates, or you can just build your own templates for rendering content and use the styles from there. Pretty much anywhere you use HTML, you can reference these styles. The styles are all defined in the Mojo Framework CSS. You look at the style sheet files after you install the SDK, you'll see all the definitions. And you can override any of these styles or add your own styles. You will use CSS in your own application style sheet. We're not going to do any of that today, but you have a style sheets folder. You can create CSS code in there to be able to define your own styles or override the styles within the framework. The resources for this are still pretty basic. The framework CSS is the best resource for finding out what's there and how it works. But we do have an excellent application in the SDK called Style Matters. This is in your sample code, and you can load this on your device or in your emulator. And I've preloaded it here. We're going to look at it for a moment. So Style Matters is a webOS application, and it shows you a list of style topics, scene styles. Some things that relate to lists. Lists are used quite a bit in webOS, and you can see some of the different categories of styles here. There's styles for individual widgets, and even some kind of special topics at the end. Each of these topics is organized in a very similar way. Let's look at this fixed header. This is a very common style in webOS applications where you have this gray pill across the top with a title. This is called a fixed header, and then so each of these topics shows you kind of what the style looks like at the top, and then it shows you the HTML that generated it. So in this case, this fixed header was created or generated by using a POM header style left, so that the text is aligned left, with the title inserted in between it. And then there's a spacer, another style, which is used to create some space between the header and the content that's going to follow it. Now, the header that we just used in our application is called a page header, and there's several different variations of a page header. We use this one here, the multi-line header without an icon, and it's the second in this list. So if we look down below, we see all this HTML. This is the HTML here that looks exactly like the HTML that we use within our application. So this application is very useful for you to get an idea of, without looking at the CSS, in the framework, you can kind of get an idea of what's available, how it's being used, see what visually the effects are, and then what a lot of the code is that you would use to generate it. So let's go back to our application now. So we've created an application. We've created a single scene. Let's create a second scene, or actually let's use another scene and do some scene transitions. So here I've got a second version of the application, and there's a few things that are new about it. The first is that before I explain this models folder here, because I've added something into this app, and I first want to say the first part of this is we're going to create two buttons to be able to navigate from scene to scene. So I've just modified the HTML to create these two new divs. called next story and previous story. You can see that they're just divs, but I've assigned them the style called POM button. So these divs will look just like POM or webOS button widgets or Mojo button widgets with the previous and the next title. So that's the only change that I've made to my HTML. We're going to now, all the rest of the changes are going to be in the code. But before we dive into the changes that we're going to make to the assistant, you remember that we were assigning the just a kind of a standard, some dummy story text, title and body text into the divs. We actually want to use a real data object this time because we're going to need to have multiple stories, and we like to set the stage for having multiple feeds as well. So I've created this data object, which is called feeds. I put it in a new directory called models, which isn't really important. You can assign it whatever directory name you want. Feeds is mainly just a list where each entry in the list corresponds to a feed, a different news feed, title, URL, number of unread stories, as well as a list of stories within that feed. And then each stories entry has a title, a couple of versions of text content, one with and without markup, and then an unread style type class that I'm using to distinguish unread stories. As we look further down, I've created some dummy stories for this using the New York Times. These are old New York Times stories, quite old actually. And they've just been put in here as sample stories right now. And then I've created a couple methods to initialize this list when the feed is called. So this is a fairly basic data model. Now, for us to use this, we have to have a way of creating it. So we've modified the Sage Assistant to instantiate this feed. So it actually creates a new version of the feed and assigns it to this .feeds. And then because Story View has to handle multiple stories, I decided at this point also to make a change that could handle multiple feeds. So we added some arguments to the push to Story View, where we pass it the name of the feed that it's going to display and the name and the index of the story. So we only have one feed, so we just use that first reference, and we are going to start with the first story. I've added one other thing to this, which is a global news.unread story. We're going to start marking stories as read and unread when we view them, as something else we're doing in our scene assistant. So now that as I look at my scene assistant, there's quite a few changes here. First is in the creator function, we now have to handle these arguments that get passed. So you can see that we have story feed and story index get passed in about which story, and we're going to assign them to the assistant object, so I can retain these and then use these throughout the assistant. So it's pretty important that you hold on to your arguments during this creator function, because you won't have any other access to your arguments in the other methods unless you save them at this point. Within the setup function, the first thing that we've got here is we just actually want to hide these buttons. Remember, we're creating two buttons in the layout. I want to hide the previous button when I'm on the first story, and I want to hide the next button when I'm on the last story. So I've got some logic here that says if I'm on the first story, then get the element ID for the previous story button, and then use this prototype hide function to hide it. And then I do the same thing with the next story button at the end of the list. This next section of code sets up the handlers for the buttons. So when the next story button is pressed, I need to handle that button press. When the previous button is pressed, I need to handle that button press. So I set those up, and then I've created these handlers down below, previous story and next story. We'll talk about the contents of these in a minute. But the next story and the previous story are the two handlers methods that I've added to my function. So I'm going to reference these in this code, and that's what this references here are, this next story, this previous story, and I'm going to bind the system to them using bind as event necessary. You need to bind your assistants to your handlers if you want to be able to use the scene assistant methods or data in those handlers. So we can see here we're using these references down here to this, we want to be sure that we bind them up here. So I created these handlers, and then I set up, use another controller method to listen on these elements for the Mojo tap event, referencing those handlers. And then the last part of the setup is I'm doing just what I did before, but in terms of assigning content to the inner HTML. But this time I'm getting my content from the feed data model instead of the canned content that I used previously. In the activate method, I've added a new function here, which is just looking to see if the story is read or unread, and if it's previously unread, then I mark it as read. It's really not all that germane to the example that I'm showing you for the webOS interfaces, but it just gives you an idea of the kind of thing that you might do in an activate method. Then the last thing that I've added here is this cleanup method, which takes away and removes the listeners when the scene is popped. So down in these next story and the previous story methods, I've added, I've made some changes to the stage controller functions that I'm using. Previously, we used pushScene, and we just named the story view and pushed that scene, and that worked very nicely. But I'm showing you a different scene here. But previously when we pushed the story view scene, we used pushScene. But now we're going to be actually going from one story to the next. We don't want to push a new scene each time because that would actually add more scenes to our scene stack. I'm going to switch here back to the slides for a moment. If you remember, when you put scenes, when you go from scene 1 to scene 2, it puts scene 2 on the stack above scene 1. Top scene is always displayed. Then I go to scene 3, that goes above scene 2. It's always displayed. And then when I pop, I remove the scenes. There are a number of methods that you have to be able to manage the scene stack. We used pushScene previously. I'm now about to show you swapScene. But there are other methods that you can use to kind of manage this like a stack. So since we're moving, we're actually moving story to story at the same, really on the same scene. We just want to do a different view in that scene. We're going to use swapScene, which actually removes the old story from the stack and puts the new story on the stack all in the same motion. At the same time, rather than just use the, I could just say swapScene story view, but I want to change the transition type. When a new scene is pushed, there's a zooming transition that takes place. Because we're moving laterally, we're going to use this cross-state transition. And this shows you that instead of just using the scene name in these methods, you can use an object, again a JSON object type, which we call scene arguments, which gives you some different parameters that you can pass to the framework as part of your scene transition. And there's more options for you here, which you can find as you look in the SDK documentation. All right, so let's run this this last application example. This time it's News 2.2. It goes well. You can see here now we've got our first story, and I've got my next button. If I tap next, I see my second story, and now I see next and previous. And I can kind of scroll through here, back and forth. And you can see that I haven't added anything to the stack, each time as it's a top-level scene. So that shows you a bit more about scene transitions and the scene stack. So we've gone through the kind of introductory material and getting started, as well as the examples that we planned for today. Just to recap a little bit, you register and download the SDK at http://developer.pom.com. New apps, you get introduced to some new tools. POM Generate is a fairly powerful tool used for creating new applications, new scenes. If you're doing styling, you have questions about styling, check out the Style Matters app. It's a very powerful kind of aid in understanding how styling works. If you don't understand the scene lifecycle, if it's a little confusing to you, it's important to understand that. You should try to look at that more. These different methods are used in concert with the controller, kind of the lifecycle operation of the framework, and it's important you understand kind of what's done where. The relationship of systems and controllers. Assistants are delegates to controllers. They work with them. It's a somewhat unique aspect with webOS. and it's important, again, to kind of understanding kind of the overall operation of webOS. And then there's the scene stack. They're very powerful. We introduced you to a couple of these methods, pushScene and swapScene and transitions, and there's a lot more that you can do with the scene stack and the scene stack methods. If you want more information, obviously the SDK site. This material closely followed Chapter 2, as Catherine mentioned, of the webOS book from O'Reilly. You can refer back to that book for more in-depth discussion of some of the same material, as well as see where this kind of lesson leads. So I appreciate that. I think we have a little bit of time for questions at this point, so I'll turn it back to Catherine.
Thanks, Mitch. Wow, you covered a lot of ground very quickly and very, very well, I have to say. Here's a question from Dan. He wanted to know if there were plans to extend the assistance to other languages like Python or Lua.
No, we're pretty wedded to JavaScript, for webOS. We didn't talk today about services, which are sort of, back-end capabilities, and there is a possibility that at some point there may be services can be built in other languages, but right now JavaScript is our language of choice, and there really are no plans to go beyond that.
And I know that you can't usually speak on when, but someone is asking about general time frame for the 64-bit Windows SDK.
I know that's an issue. I don't have an answer for you right now, but I can get an answer posted in some way on that.
But people can look forward to it, right?
Yes.
Okay, good enough. And any other questions? There have been some going by, but people have been very good about answering them for each other. So, okay, so Rich, you probably see this, is asking, let's see, when Adobe adds in Flash support, will that be released in a new SDK release?
We're part of the Flash consortium that Adobe's put together, and we've been working with them. We haven't announced any specific go-to-market plans for it, so I can't really comment on that right now. It really kind of depends on how that work progresses.
Okay. And then, let me see. I'm not sure I understand all these. Rich is asking if there's a way to simulate development for the Pixie. Premature.
Yeah, well, not actually. The emulator and the tools that I demonstrated today will be updated to support Pixie emulation as well. I don't have an exact date on that availability, but that's definitely something that we are working on.
Okay, and then okay, and is there a plan to provide a developer phone?
I'm not sure I understand that question. You mean for specific hardware for developers?
Probably,
perhaps.
I think so.
As far as I know right now, there are no plans for that. It's something we have investigated, but because of the carrier relationships that we have, it's a more difficult program to offer than, in the old days, Palm had PDAs and was more able to provide kind of various programs for developers around hardware. So as far as I know right now, there isn't a plan for a program for developers for hardware, but that could change.
Okay. And then Dan is asking, let me see if I understand this, and don't laugh if I don't. He's saying when popped, that's capital P-O-P, popped, where does the displayed window go? Is it destroyed?
Yes.
Okay, so it's destroyed. Yeah, that was an easy question. And then Thomas is asking, is there further documentation to help changing the design of the Mojo widget?
Yeah, there's a little bit more on the SDK site. There's some higher level information, kind of like guidelines, and then there's actually a spreadsheet, some of which was used as an appendix in the book, Appendix C, which talks more about the relationship of styles with each other. It's a little bit confusing because, like, we showed an example where you had a header style and then you had a wrapper style within it. So on the SDK site, there's a spreadsheet that shows some of those relationships about if you use a header style, then what are the wrapper what are the options for wrapper styles inside of it? What are some of the optional styles you can use with it? But I think we understand that we're not putting enough documentation out around styling right now, and we intend to do more over time. But there is a little bit more on the site.
Okay. Boy, we're running out of time. A bunch of questions just came in. Let's see. So Tanny asks, what process do we use to make sure that the SDK is updated to the latest version?
If you go to the site, you can download the new versions whenever they're available. They post them on the site, and they also post them in the forums when new versions are available. So at this point, you have to, kind of monitor the SDK site to know when a new version has been pushed up. And then you simply install the version, and then you can start testing with that version as soon as you install it.
Okay. Well, I'm afraid we're out of time. There are still some questions, but maybe we can bring them up in your next webcast.
Or we can try to as the questions come in, perhaps we can try to answer them in some other way so that people see them after the fact.
Do you have a blog, Mitch?
I don't have a public blog, actually, no. But there is well, I have one actually we use internally, but I haven't actually gone to the trouble of putting a public one together. But Palm does have a developer blog, so I probably can post answers in that developer blog. That's actually a good idea. So why don't I do that? If we want, we'll gather up the questions that we haven't answered, and we'll try to put answers together and put them on the Palm developer blog, within the next few days, or certainly within a week by the latest.
Okay. I'll make sure that you get a copy of those. So thank you very much for doing this today, and I want to thank everyone else for joining us. We'll have the recording of this available. We'll post it on our YouTube channel and on our site. Should only take a couple days, and I'll send everyone a link as soon as we're ready. If you want to keep a copy of the chat transcript, the best way is to click in there, and I don't know if you can do Command-All with this new upgrade. You can on a Windows machine, but not. You have to select the whole thing and copy it on a Mac. So just take a copy of it and paste it in the text file, and then I know you can. It's kind of tiresome. Click at the bottom and the top, and that does the trick, though. And copy it and paste it in a text file, and you'll have a copy. If for some reason you don't get to do that on time, you can email me at webcast@o'reilly.com, and I'll send you a copy. And that's about it. So thanks, everyone. I hope you'll join us again next time.
Thank you.